Hey everybody, today we're going to look at some synthetic scales. And synthetic scales are scales that are essentially made up, that are not part of any diatonic system. All of the major scales, the minor scales and all of their modes are, as well as the subsets of these scales, which are the pentatonic, major, minor, pentatonic scales. All of these scales are parts of the diatonic system, but synthetic scales are scales that are not part of the diatonic scale system. And there are dozens and dozens of scales, and literally there's no end to how many scales you could create, but there are some that are so common that we need to address them. And the three that we're going to look at are also symmetrical in nature, which means that they have a consistent whole step, half step pattern in them throughout the scale. So the first one we're going to look at is the whole tone scale. And the whole tone scale is exactly what you might think it is. It's a scale made up of all whole tones. So if we start on C, we just start building whole steps until we get to C again, and then we ran out of notes. Now, G sharp to B flat looks like a third, but it's really just a whole step in sound. So enharmonics play a big part in this, and there's no right or wrong way to spell some of these scales. Enharmonics are frequent, so don't stress over that. So this scale could be written any number of ways. This could be a G flat, this could be an A flat, that could be an A sharp, and so forth. At some point, you have to, when you write this scale out, you're going to have to skip a third on your paper. So just don't stress over that. The whole tone scale is a 6-note scale and made up of all whole tones. And if you keep going, you're going to start to repeat the notes. And if you can look at this scale as a juxtaposition of two augmented triads a second apart, for example, C, E, G sharp is an augmented triad, and D, F sharp, A sharp, or B flat is also an augmented triad. So taking these two augmented triads, putting them together, creates this exotic sound, which was a favorite of Debussy as well as other composers. The next scale we're going to look at is the octatonic scale. Octa meaning 8, tonic meaning tone, 8 tones or 8 notes. The octatonic scale, if we start on C, well, you could spell it different ways. The first one we're going to look at is the half step, whole step construction. So we're going to go half step, whole step, half step, whole step until we get to the note C again. So if we go half step, C sharp, then whole step, D sharp, half step, E, whole step, F sharp, half step, G, whole step, A, half step, B flat, whole step would take us back to C again. So this half step, whole step progression, and again enharmonics are okay, gives us 8 notes before we repeat the octave, which is why this is called an octatonic scale or an octatonic collection of pitches. And we can see this as two juxtaposed diminished seventh triads, C, in essence, C, E flat, F sharp, A, which would be a 7th chord. And we could, if we start here on C sharp, we have the same thing. We have a diminished 7th chord from C sharp, E, G, B flat. And this combination of two diminished 7th chords juxtaposed by a half step here gives us 8 tones, which is the octatonic collection. Now, if we were to start this on C sharp and go half step, whole step, we would create 8 different pitches. If not completely different, but a different collection. If we started on D, we would come up with a 3rd collection of pitches. But then when we start on E flat or D sharp, we come up with these same notes again, all the exact same notes. And so there are only 3 octatonic collections before you start repeating the same notes again. The other way to think about this chord, and a way in which jazz musicians often think about this chord, as a dominant 7th chord. And if you think of it as a C, E, G, B flat, with half steps going into each of the chord tones, here, here, and here, and then one above the root. A jazz player might use this to embellish in his or her improvisation over a C dominant 7 chord with some sort of alterations. The octatonic collection that I showed you there is half whole, but of course you could also go whole half. If we do that, we go whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, and half step, and whole step. And that will take us to 8 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which will also be 2 diminished 7th chords. Now juxtaposed a little bit of a different way. And jazz players often think of this as a way to improvise over a diminished chord with half steps going into each of the chord tones. Creates an interesting sounding scale. The last, and also there are 3 of these. If you start on C and go whole half, then you start on C sharp and go whole half, you start on D and go whole half, then you start on E flat and go whole half, you start to repeat the same notes. So there are 3 of those collections as well. So the last one we'll talk about is the hexatonic. The hexatonic scale. The hexatonic scale, literally 6-tone scale, is similar to the whole tone in that it has 6 notes, but the pattern is going to be half step minor third. So here we would go C, C sharp, minor third up to E, half step up to F, minor third enharmonically up to G sharp, half step up to A, and then a minor third up to C. And again, enharmonics don't matter here. This could be spelled with an A flat and so forth. But we have half step, minor third, and what this creates is 2 juxtaposed augmented triads, the same thing that we saw here in the whole tone scale, 2 augmented triads. But in the whole tone scale, the only chord you can create out of this collection is an augmented triad. There are no other options. No matter what note you start on, you're going to get an augmented triad. Here, we can actually create some different harmonies. If we were using this as a basis of composition, you could, for example, have an F, A, C chord. You could have a C sharp, E, G sharp minor triad, and so forth. So there's more than just the augmented possibility there. So these are the 3 synthetic scales that I want you to think about: whole tone, the octatonic collection, which could either be half whole or whole half. This is also called a diminished scale. By some, because of its two diminished seventh chords. And then the third is the hexatonic.